Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Today, we are going to talk about clinical trials, and we are going to try to make this complex topic as simple and straightforward as possible, and hopefully be able to answer some questions if anybody has some at the end. So I want to start by sharing that the content for today's presentation was created by Cancer Support Community. They are an international nonprofit organization. You may be familiar with them as Gilda's Club as well. And Atrium Health Levine Cancer is the North Carolina partner for Cancer Support Community. And our goal together is to be able to provide additional resources and support for our patients with cancer. Today's content has been reviewed by medical professionals for accuracy and validity. And you can see the dates on this review are 2019 and 2020. So I have taken the creative liberty to update some of our statistics to the data from 2025 by the American Cancer Society. And I will be happy to point those out just so you guys know where any updates have been made. So I am Whitney Mitchelides. I have over a decade of experience with clinical trials and working in research. It all started when I was a research assistant getting my master's degree in public health. Then I had the pleasure of working with our wonderful clinical trials office at LCI for 8.5 years, where I worked as both a research coordinator and an educator for the department, helping prepare, train, and educate the staff on working with clinical trials, understanding federal regulations, and how to follow all of the standards and procedures that we have in place to keep our patients, our staff safe, and make sure our trials are effective. I am also a certified clinical research professional. And in my current role, I work with the Department of Supportive Oncology. And there I am the Adolescent and Young Adult Program Manager, meaning we have a program to support our patients who are diagnosed with cancer between the ages of 15 to 39 to provide extra clinical care support as well as any psychosocial support they may need as they navigate this very challenging time of their lives, one as humans, but also as young adults with cancer. So let's jump in. Today, we are going to talk about what a clinical trial is, why they're important, how they work or how they're structured, why many people don't participate in clinical trials, and then if you are interested, how to participate in a clinical trial. And a big part of that is going to be communicating with your doctor about research and clinical trials. And then we'll wrap up by talking about the future direction of clinical trials. And I'm happy to answer any questions with the time that we have left over in the end. So I always like to start any conversation about clinical trials with a basic framework of standard of care. What we mean when we say standard of care is a series of guidelines that we are going to follow for treatment based on our patient's condition, staging, and what we know about the disease that they have. So in cancer, that means that we follow the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, or NCCN guidelines. So as a patient comes into Atrium Health Levine Cancer, we're going to look to understand their diagnosis, the staging, maybe any genetic mutations that we know about, and other things that are presenting with their disease. And from that, our team would consult the NCCN guidelines that uses data from previous clinical trials to help us make decisions about what their treatment should look like. And that can include our first line plans and any secondary options that we have as well. And all of those decisions that we're using the guidelines to help us make are based on data from previous clinical trials. So that's really the start of why they're so important. Um, we think of clinical trial as also an alternative to standard of care. So if you think about it in that lens, this is going to be an experiment or a scientific study where we are looking to better understand new treatment or therapy options. So in this case, we could look at a clinical trial as an alternative to standard of care, really with the goal of determining, is it better than what we would be offering you if you just came in and received normal treatment? Clinical trials help us with a lot of things. They help prevent cancers. They help us diagnose them early, and that's really important, especially as we think about our younger populations that have so much potential in life and years to live. They help us improve treatment, and that's for all types of tumors. So whether it's early stage, advanced stage, rare, which we see often in children, or difficult to treat tumors. This is going to help us collect that data and understand how do we improve the results that we see in our patients. They're going to help reduce the risk of recurrence and reduce side effects, which is really important as well. You know, if a treatment is super effective and we see great results, but it makes our patients so sick that they can't continue with treatment, it's really not a great option. So we're always looking at side effects as well. And then how to improve quality of life and overall survival. And we'll talk about that. But this is kind of a newer concept in research. And we're looking again, not just at treating the disease that our patients come in with, but also how can we make sure that their life is full, that we are managing their symptoms and giving them the best possible outcome that they can get. So here's a few statistics, and this is where I did some 2025 updates on why these clinical trials are so important. So because of research, now we know that 7 out of 10, or 70% of our patients with cancer are living at least 5 years after their diagnosis. And in the 1970s, that number was closer to 1 out of 2, or 50%. I can tell you the 2020 data was 66%. So in 5 years, that has already improved significantly. And when we think about our adolescents and young adults, that number is even higher. So we know that 86% of adolescents and young adults diagnosed with cancer are going to live at least 5 years or more after that initial diagnosis. And that's incredible. The nation's death rate has dropped 34% since the 1990s. So, in about 30 to 40 years, we have seen dramatic increases or decreases, I guess you would say, in that death rate. Um, and this number was significantly different from 2020 when it was 18%. So, I think that just demonstrates really how much progress we've made in a very short amount of time in reducing that death rate. And that is millions of lives that have been saved and deaths that have been avoided. And then individuals with cancer, now that they're living longer lives, they're also fuller lives with less symptoms, managing fewer side effects, and again, really making that a better experience all around. And again, this is especially important when we think about adolescents and young adults, because we know they're going to go on to live long, full lives, and they are going to have some lasting effects from both their cancer and that treatment that they received. So anything that we can learn about how to make that a better experience, the better. Here are some very specific examples of how clinical trials have helped with specific disease types. I won't go through all of them, but I think some things to note are like for blood cancers, new T cell therapies have 90% remission rates, so almost perfect in people with advanced cancers. And when we think about our pediatric population, um, often in those settings, they are very in tune with clinical trials, and many children do participate. And as a result of that, we see 80% of children are cured of their cancer. And often those are very rare cancers as well. So it's incredible the progress that has been made so far. And we hope to keep that momentum going for a very long time. So, why are clinical trials important for treatment? Well, we have to address that every treatment, this says new, but I would argue all treatments at some point for cancer were tested via a clinical trial. So, if we want to improve and we want to be able to offer the best options, we need to continue to test and keep coming up with a new way to treat them. And the faster that these trials can find participants and enroll them, the faster that these new treatments are able to roll out to the market, replace the existing standard of care, and become the best treatment option. And like I said, we are seeing rapid, dramatic progress in cancer treatment, with those death rates dropping and survival extending for many populations. New therapies are focused on helping us understand how cancers are coming about and how they grow, and really how to treat them in a targeted way. New models allow for faster and more flexible evaluation of results. So, monitoring plans have really moved to a remote way of doing work. We're able to document things electronically, and it just allows things to move much faster. And even as we think about clinical trial logistics, I feel like those are being modified often to make trials more flexible so that patients can participate. And like I mentioned, there's a greater emphasis on quality of life. And we're learning what's important to our patients and how we can improve in those areas to help those who are cured from cancer, or even those who are living with cancer, live their fullest, best lives going forward. I do want to touch on why minority participation is so important in clinical trials. So while we have hundreds of clinical trials available, and they're always looking for participants, we know that less than 10% of people with cancer are participating in clinical trials. And you'll see that number looks dramatically different for children and for adults. So that's why it's 10% here. And we'll talk about the adult rate later. Um, of those who participate, most of them are white men. And that's been the case for a very long time, which means that people of color, underserved populations, older people, and women, I'll also add in adolescents and young adults, have not been included in these clinical trials or have not been asked to participate in clinical trials. And there's a lot of reasons that we'll talk about. But increasing participation of these diverse populations is super important so that we know that this treatment is going into effect for all groups and that they're having the success rate as white men. So, when they don't join clinical trials, we know that racial minorities specifically benefit differently from treatments. We know that cancer outcomes in the United States are not equal, and it can worsen existing disparities across racial and ethnic groups. So there are some specific examples below. African Americans overall have higher death rates from cancer, and we see that Asian Americans have higher rates of liver cancer, and American Indian, Alaskan Natives have higher rates for colorectal cancer. And that's really important, one, that we're aware of that and that we acknowledge it, but also that we find a way to include these groups in our clinical trials so that we know that when the results come out, that it's applicable to these groups and that they're able to access these treatments like everyone else. And this just highlights that there are significant inequities in cancer burden, including that higher mortality or death rate and disease prevalence compared to non-Hispanic white populations. So, healthcare professionals and researchers need to do a much better job of trying to include Hispanic and non white populations when we are designing, implementing, and kind of executing these clinical trials so that they're inclusive and their results stretch across all of these different groups. So, why wouldn't racial minorities be as involved in clinical trials? Well, there's a lot of reasons. So, we'll kind of chat through those a little bit. One of the main ones is that they may not trust medical research. One of the studies that's important to highlight here is the Tuskegee syphilis study that happened starting in the 1930s, spanning to the 70s. So it was a 40-year study where the United States government got poor Black sharecroppers in the South to participate in a study with the goal of comparing the syphilis disease and how it took over the body in white people versus Black people. And part of the benefits to participating was that these poor sharecroppers received medical care during the duration of the trial, but they also received burial help, which was significant for their families at the time. And this study really wasn't an issue until a treatment for syphilis was discovered. And what happened, unfortunately, is the researchers here withheld that new treatment from these participants because they wanted to study, again, what happened over time. So, as a result, there were negative effects for not only these people, but generations of lives as a result. And that was unnecessary and, quite frankly, unethical. And while the United States government has issued an apology for this and they've acknowledged their wrongdoing, that leaves great generational trauma in these populations. And it's important that healthcare researchers recognize the damage that has been done and work extra hard to overcome really the mistakes that were made in the past. So, this medical distrust or mistrust is really earned. And it's important in research that we find a way to overcome that and include their voices and include their experience because it is so valuable and we want to be able to help all populations. Some may have been given poor medical care in the past. So that could be a result of access, that could be a result of discrimination, things like that. And as a result, they haven't had a great experience with their doctor or researchers, and they certainly don't want to sign up for that in the future. Many racial minorities may not speak English as a first language, and often we see English speaking as an inclusion exclusion criteria for eligibility. So they may be not included by default, and it's really not a lack of interest, but just access to participation. They may have experienced discrimination when seeking healthcare. So this one also makes me think about some of our patients that may not have citizenship in the United States who are fearful for seeking medical care in the instance that they might be reported or denied care. They may have lower reading levels. So we would call that a low health literacy. And that makes it hard to learn about clinical trials, to comprehend what's being asked of them to participate, and to even be able to stay compliant with what the trial is asking them to do. Some racial minorities may have health problems that don't allow them to take part in the study. Often, again, as part of that inclusion exclusion criteria for eligibility, we do see comorbidities listed as reasons to exclude patients. So that could be a big reason why they don't participate is they have other health issues going on that just makes them not eligible. Many may have jobs that don't allow them flexibility or sick leave or time off of work to be able to participate in some of the logistics for these trials. Or they're caregivers. They could be caregivers for children, for their parents, or even part of that sandwich generation where they're caregiving for both sets. And they just don't have the ability to be available for a clinical trial and go through treatment and manage life's responsibilities. And then the last reason here is that they can't afford clinical trial costs, potentially related to transportation or housing. That's in reference to access and if the clinical trial isn't available really near their home. But we'll talk about costs as well towards the end of this presentation, and really how that is a big barrier for a lot of people. So not having the flexibility or the funds or the readily available huge cancer institute that they can access easily are all going to be barriers. So let's talk now about how clinical trials work. Before being included in a clinical trial, a drug is going to go through what we call preclinical research. And this is where we are going to test it first in a laboratory. So that's what we would call bench research. And that's what we think of when we think of scientists with lab coats and beakers and pouring liquids around. They're looking at diseases at the cellular level and coming up with new ways to treat those, especially in a targeted manner. When that shows some promise of being effective, they would then move to testing in animals. So we often see this with rats, mice, or dogs. And that's just part of the process so that they can prove it out in a living being. This preclinical research phase usually takes about 1 to 3 years before the drug can be introduced to humans. At that point, we're going to start introducing drugs to humans, and we do this through a phase 1 clinical trial. This is really exciting for the healthcare professionals and the researchers that work in this area because we really know very little about the drug at that point, and we are learning kind of alongside our participants each step of the way. So the goal with phase 1 is to evaluate safety and determine a safe dose and watch for any side effects. So again, it's not easy to communicate with our patients about what we expect to see because we may not know at this point. We may be sitting there and experiencing these side effects alongside them for the first time. So we're really information gathering at this point. When we talk about safety, that means that we're looking at what side effects occur when this drug is introduced to the body, and we're looking at how intense those responses are. So is the nausea manageable, or is it so extreme that our patient cannot continue with treatment? We usually see this in a very small group of participants, around 20 to 80. And phase 1 clinical trials take about a year to complete. They're often done in highly specialized facilities that can provide extra care, extra monitoring, and really have the resources available to take care of anything that could occur as a result of like a side effect gone wrong. What I really want to hammer home for phase 1 is we're not talking about, is this drug effective yet? Really, at this point, we're just thinking about safety and determining the right dose. So what we would do is based on our study and how it is written, for a phase 1 trial, you would increase the dose at very systematic levels until you started to see side effects that were undesirable, that are unacceptable. And at that point, you go 1 dose down, and we would move forward with future clinical trials based on that dose. So really, phase 1 is all about saying, can we administer this drug safely and determining the dose that we want to move forward with for the rest of our phases. Phase 2 clinical trials are going to provide us with more information again about safety. And this time we want to see if it's effective. What's happening to our tumor as a result of this drug or treatment being introduced? This is going to involve a larger number of participants, usually 100 to 300, and could take around 2 years. We may start to see randomization introduced at this point, or the idea of different treatment arms. So an example of that would be we might see arm 1 is standard of care, arm 2 is the experimental treatment, and arm 3 could be looking at the standard of care plus the experimental treatment. And we're going to compare all of those and see if our tumor burden is growing, if it's staying the same, or if it's getting better. Once the drug has moved through phase 2 of the clinical trial, it will now move into phase 3. And I think this is what most people think of when they think of a clinical trial. We know our dose, we know it's safe, and now we know it's effective from our previous phases. So what we're going to do in phase 3 is we're going to compare this new treatment or drug against the standard of care. And we really want to know, is this better, the same, or worse? This is kind of the moment where we're saying, all right, is this better than what we're already using? These studies are often hundreds to thousands of participants, and they're going to be happening across many different sites, potentially around the country or the world. If you think about like the COVID vaccine, that's a great example of something where we really want to compare international results so that we know it's effective in America and Australia and Japan and Switzerland, right? We're getting these same results, same benefits all around the world. And these studies have very specific measures for success or failure. So we are going to talk about what those measures look like in a couple of slides. But just know they're going to be highly evaluated. And of course, we're still looking at side effects that are occurring with our patients and making sure that this drug is safe and that nothing extreme is happening. Once a drug is through phase 3 clinical trials, this is where it would be approved by the Food and Drug Administration or the FDA to go to market for general use in the United States and potentially as the new standard of care if we found out that it is better or equal to the current standard of care. So I do want to mention that through these phases, from discovery to approval, is usually a timeline of 10 to 15 years. So this is an incredibly lengthy process. It's very expensive and uses a lot of resources. And from that, about 12% of drugs actually get approved. When we think about cancer care, especially, very few actually make it to this point. And that's why it's so important that we are actively participating so that we can either rule things out or have new discoveries. Some drugs, not all, will go into phase 4 clinical trials. And this is where they're going to evaluate side effects in the real world setting, and they're going to do it over decades. And again, we're just looking at safety, we're looking at overall use, and the goal is to make sure that our drugs are still safe and effective and don't cause any extreme side effects in a long-term application. So I think we can all think of examples of drugs that have been pulled from the shelves. The one that comes to my mind most recently is phenylephrine, And that's what is found in a lot of common cold and cough syrup. So NyQuil, Theraflu, that kind of stuff that you reach for. And very recently, the FDA came out and said, this isn't effective at all in actually what we're using it for. So I don't know that they said it was harmful, but it's not effective. And that was from years and years and years of data that has proven this out. So now the FDA has to take um, actionable steps to either remove that from the market or to make sure consumers are aware when they're using that product that it's really not going to be benefiting them in the way that they think it will. So I spoke about measurements for our clinical trials, and these later phase trials are really looking to evaluate some specific things. They're looking at overall survival. So, do patients on this new treatment live longer than the patients that receive that standard of care? Progression-free survival means how long does it take from the time that they start this treatment until their cancer begins to grow again? Disease-free survival is how long does it take before there's evidence that the cancer has recurred or it has metastasized to other areas of the body. And then complete remission um, is, does this treatment result in complete disappearance of this cancer? That's really what we're going for always. But these other metrics are really important in helping us understand quality of life and survivorship. We talk about survivorship and what that looks like, and this is really where we're getting that information from. So we've talked about why clinical trials are so important, how they work, but now let's address the elephant in the room is that very few adults actually participate in a clinical trial. Usually it's around 4% of patients with cancer who are adults participate, and that number has remained stagnant for a very long time. And we see it's fairly low with our adolescent and young adult community as well. Um, and we'll talk about why that is over these next few slides. But it could be that many people are unaware of the benefits that they could receive from clinical trials. We've talked about why minorities wouldn't participate, older people, even women, that they're underrepresented and that we need to do a better job of including them. And that our progress is slowed when we're not able to recruit patients, right? So if you think about that 10 to 15-year journey that a drug has to go through to get approval, a lot of it is also dependent on how quickly we can get people to participate in these studies to move these phases along. So, one of the primary reasons that people don't participate is this idea, and I'm sure any researcher who's consented a patient or tried to has heard the I don't want to be a guinea pig. And this comes back to that idea of bench research where they they picture mice in a cage and a scientist in a lab coat and glasses, experimenting with them. And it's unfortunate that that's like a visual that comes to mind because we know that these trials look very different from that. While they are experiments, and it's important that we acknowledge that, we are doing the study to understand, is this better? We don't really know. But you can be reassured that all trials in the United States that are being conducted and encouraged by your provider are because they really believe in the science and the methodology behind this. And we believe that there is potential for it to be beneficial. It's not something willy-nilly that we're like, yeah, let's throw some spaghetti at the wall and see if it sticks. It's based in science, it's based in the evidence we know from other trials, and now we think it has potential to help. A lot of people also, when they hear the word randomization, they immediately think of placebo. And their first thought is, I don't want a placebo, especially when we're talking about cancer. So it's important to note that in the cancer setting, when we think about clinical trials, we would never give a patient nothing or a placebo in place of treatment. If they're randomized, they would either receive the experimental treatment or standard of care. So we know that the alternative is what they would get regardless of participation or not. That gets a little nuanced because sometimes our standard of care is watchful waiting. And that's true in this case as well. So we may not treat those patients, so to speak, but we know that that is the same exact level of care they would be receiving if they did not participate. Often, participants know which arm they've been randomized to. There is potential for that. And it's important to know across all studies, if at any point a participant doesn't want to be a part of the study any longer, they can withdraw or quit. So if a patient were to determine, oh, I got the standard of care and not the experimental treatment, I don't want to go through with the study, that's okay. Even if it's inconvenient, they can quit. That's their right. And our job is to advocate for that decision as healthcare professionals. Clinical trials may not be offered in a patient's setting, like where they see their doctor, where they receive care. And in order to participate, that may mean moving to a different treatment facility or moving to a different doctor. That's scary and that's frustrating. And all of those things are true. There are many reasons why we don't open trials at all sites across the world or across the country. It could be that the study is competing with another study that's very similar for the same disease type. It's also that this takes a lot of energy and education and training to do. And we want to make sure that the studies that we are putting forward for our patients are safe and that we can execute them to the best of our abilities. So if we try to do everything all the time, we're going to do it all really poorly. And that's not the care that we want to provide our patients. So it's important to know that if you had to leave your facility or your doctor to participate in a clinical trial, you can always come back to your doctor if you so choose to. But knowing that that's a potential outcome is really important and something to wrap your head around. Cost. A big misnomer for participating in clinical trials is that the study is going to cover all aspects, that your study visits, the treatment, transportation, all of those things, scans, labs are all covered by the study. And unfortunately, it's a little more complicated than that. Oftentimes, when we think about costs associated with a trial, it is either paid for by the study or it is paid for by the individual's insurance. So anything that's standard of care is often billed as it normally would be. And then anything that is extra or additional for the trial is billed to the study. This isn't a problem unless a patient's insurance doesn't agree to cover certain things, or if they don't have insurance or they're underinsured. So it is really important to consider the costs associated with a trial and talk to the team that's presenting it so that you understand all of the details that go into that, because it can be confusing. And we're here to help our patients find answers to those questions. We've talked about suspicion and distrust when we talked about the Tuskegee syphilis trial. But I think another way that we can think of it as a very real example is the physician that linked autism to vaccines. There has been a lot of data that has come out and information about those reports being falsified. And although there are repercussions when researchers do falsify data, when they share information that isn't accurate, and there's significant repercussions. It could include jail time, fines, or losing their medical license. It still leaves ongoing conversations about, well, what is true? And if I can't trust this researcher, why would I trust this one? And um, grouping everyone in the same category. So there is definitely some distrust and suspicion of researchers and maybe people in the medical community and what their intentions are. Um, so, like we talked about, it's really important that our research teams are qualified, that they follow procedures, that we're following the law that's there to protect our patients and these participants, to make sure that everybody gets the best level of care and that the data that's being produced from these studies is meaningful and is accurate and can really help those in the future. Maybe people don't participate because no one talked to them about it. It could be that the provider isn't aware, which I certainly wouldn't hope to be the case in our institution, but certainly could be across smaller healthcare facilities or doctors that just don't have the infrastructure that we have access to at Atrium Health Levine Cancer. So, if your doctor or your care team isn't talking to you about clinical trials, we encourage you to ask questions, bring it up, and be willing to get a second opinion. Most of the time, if you talk to another provider within our institution, they're going to give you the same answers. But if you want to speak to a doctor that's at another healthcare facility, that is certainly acceptable and something that should be encouraged. And any doctor worth their salt wouldn't have a problem with that. And then finally, it may be that clinical trials are seen as like a last ditch effort. Like anyone who's participating in this doesn't have any other options. This is the end of the road for them, and they're, just doing it because it's the only thing available. And that's not always the case. It certainly can be. But we know that we have seen dramatic results for people who participated in like CAR T cell therapies for their blood cancers and had complete response. And it's just been incredible to see as not the last effort, but really an option that offers hope. And that leads us into the next slide about why you should participate in a clinical trial. These really do provide a new opportunity, something that isn't available and could really make a significant impact on a patient's health. So for that reason, we always want you to encourage or to explore as many options as possible. It may mean getting access to the newest, greatest treatment that others don't even know is out there yet. You will receive the best care. Our clinical trials office has the best research team who are going to monitor you, educate, and give you just an extra level of care above and beyond what you're receiving with the clinical care team. It's an opportunity for patients to share their experience, have their voice heard, really let what's happening to them, which is lemons, be lemonade for somebody in the future and be that hope and improved quality of life or improved treatment in the future. So again, I am obviously an advocate for clinical trials, and everyone in Atrium Health Levine Cancer really believes in the importance of research and using this to help propel the care that we give forward. So we encourage all of our patients to have a conversation with their doctor and their care team about what research or clinical trials are available. It's not all about treatment. There are definitely survey trials out there that ask about cancer-related fatigue, or there's some based on like coping with big feelings and trying out applications for peer mentoring. So there's all kinds of studies out there that are available, and just being brave enough to ask the question and open up that conversation can really lead to a lot of opportunities to participate. And then we want to touch on, if you do agree to participate in a study, part of that process is informed consent. And a piece of that is a big packet of paper. It could be anywhere from like 5 to 50 pages that outlines everything that's going to happen with that clinical trial. And the care team is going to talk you through the risks, the potential benefits, any side effects that we expect, potential compensation that's available. So it's a really soup to nuts comprehensive view of all aspects of this clinical trial. It's a great opportunity for patients to ask questions. And as always, we would encourage you to take it home and think about it. Our job is never to rush a decision, although sometimes treatment can rely on if you participate. But it's really about helping you make an informed decision that fits your values and makes you feel great about the care that you're receiving. So take it home, think about it, consult your loved ones, your faith leader, people you know in the medical industry. Don't consult Google MD. We don't like that. And some studies may even offer to share the results of that trial with you when they become available. So how do you find out more about trials or find trials that are available? So the first way is going to be, again, talking to your doctor or that care team. Being involved with a care center that is active in clinical trials and research, and then you can do your own search. It would be really helpful to know what type of cancer you have, the stage, and any genetic profiling information that's relevant. And just know that clinical trials are written at a scientific level. The protocols are very complex. They use research jargon and medical language, so they can be hard to navigate. Just know that there's a clinical trials office here, there's your care team and people to support you, as well as some national resources that I'll go over to help you navigate this process. And if you're looking online, again, use established resources like the ones I'll share, clinicaltrials.gov, advocacy groups that help you navigate the process, and then reputable cancer center websites. Again, we're going to stay away from Google and anything like that that could lead us to some misinformation. And I always want to emphasize making sure to talk to your doctor is really important. So here are some trusted sources for that search. The first is the National Cancer Institute offers a clinical trial search, as well as clinicaltrials.gov. That is going to list every clinical trial that is available. It has to be registered through them. So that is where you can get a lot of information. American Cancer Society also has clinical trials support and information about how to access them. And then Atrium Health Levine Cancer has a site with a list of our active clinical trials. It can be found at beinvolved.atriumhealth.org. And then there are organizations like Research Match that are part of the National Institutes of Health that can help you find studies that aren't just treatment-based, but maybe like surveys and things like I was speaking about earlier. And then the cancer support community, who helped prepare this deck, has a navigation process, a helpline called Open to Options, and they will help you navigate what questions to ask and anything related to your specific condition and treatment decisions, and help you know how to navigate kind of that path of which way do I go. And then finally, like we've been saying, talk to your doctor. So when communicating with your doctor, be open to the options that they do suggest for clinical trials. If they don't bring it up, ask. If you don't feel comfortable asking your doctor, ask your navigator or the nurse. They're always here to advocate for you and really be your representative in that clinical space. Make a list of your questions before you come or as you're in the room. That way, as you go over a lot of topics in your visit, you aren't forgetting something. Like I said, talk to that care team, nurse practitioners, nurses, coordinators, especially the research team. They're here to help you, and they are excellent resources. Take time to think about it. Process the decisions you're making so that you can make an informed decision and come out on the other side confident in the direction that you're going to go. Don't hesitate to get a second opinion and learn about clinical trials that are available in other facilities. And then again, if you do any of your own research, talk to your doctor, talk to your healthcare team about what their thoughts are and if they think it's a good direction. And then finally, where's the future of clinical trials going? Well, now we're starting to see that we're not just looking at chemo targeted at a specific cancer or organ type. So it's not just like breast cancer. Instead, we're looking at genetic mutations that are occurring and really trying to find targeted therapies that help preserve that quality of life. So we're not just wiping out your immune system and killing everything in the hopes that we get the cancer too. Now the treatments are very specific and focused on how do we best target the disease and kind of preserve everything else. We talked about there's more flexibility in trial designs. They're trying to make the logistics and the visits and the scans follow an easier pattern so that participants can actually be compliant or adhere to what's being asked of them. There are more effective therapies and better patient participation, and we're looking to increase that as we go. And then they're also getting more information and input from our patients as advocates. So now they're helping design trials and helping evaluate them and looking for opportunities where we can improve and ways that we can better meet that patient need with them in mind, not just thinking about treatment. So going back to that whole person approach that we really believe in at Atrium Health Levine Cancer. So we will end there. I want to thank Cancer Support Community for helping provide this material, as well as Pfizer, Novartis, and Bristol Myers Squibb.
Thanks for watching. For more information, visit us online, send us an email, or give us a call. Don't forget to click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you know when new videos are released. And most of all, be well.